I saw that behind closed doors, they were mean, but seemed so sweet and gentle. They come out in the end, or maybe you never see them. They were yelling, they were pushing people around, they were flirting with their secretaries, they were having affairs. You don't know the personal lives behind all these people. People in the United States Navy were studying them to see how they could create a plane that could do this. Nobody can figure out their technology. They're also the most amazing hunters that have ever existed on the planet, what they can kill with all of their flying skills. And just to think about things that were designed over hundreds of millions of years ago in the perfection. And the pressures are immense on particularly running a company like Apple, or even being a Kobe Bryant. The pressures are immense. And to manage all of that, some of your flaws are going to come out in the process. The flip side of this is, I worked in Hollywood for good 10 years before I wrote books, like the worst part of my life. And I saw these people that everyone thought was so liberal and so wonderful and so loving and warm. I saw that behind closed doors, they were mean-spirited. They were yelling. They were pushing people around. They were flirting with their secretaries. They were having affairs. You don't know the personal lives behind all these people that seem so sweet and gentle. They come out in the end, or maybe you never see them.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying people are complicated. If you're so aggressive, if you're so inconsiderate of people, you're going to reach a limit, which is what happened to these people, two people I mentioned to you, and your power is going to be diminished. It only goes so far if you're alienating people, if you're not good with them. That's why in Mastery, I have a chapter on just being good at the social game. Because there are a lot of people in this world who are very talented, very smart, who are great at computers or whatever it is, but they're horrible with people. And it's a limit. It's a wall that they can never get past. So mastery is also a social skill. For power and seduction and a little bit for war, she did research. She's a filmmaker. She has her own career. And as her career's been taking off, she doesn't really have time for research, but she edits all of my work. You know, we both, as I said, nobody's perfect. And we're both could be difficult people to live with, but we've managed and we've learned a lot, and we've been together for long enough that it's become very, very. We know what triggers the other person. We're very considerate, and you know the love that we feel is just grown in through that process. It's not like as intense as it was when you first meet somebody.
Yeah.
Because it's in long-term relationships, the sentiment and the love that you feel kind of transforms into something deeper and more spiritual. But, you know, one thing that has kept us together for so long is we share similar values and we laugh at the same things and we like watching the same kind of movies and our conversation. So if the relationship is purely physical, it's not going to last very long because you're going to get bored and the conversations are going to get boring and you're not going to have so much in common. So it's reached a point where, you know, it's gotten deeper than it initially was. And the books, I mean, she was there when I wrote The Art of Seduction, right? And she knows for a fact that I used one of the strategies in The Art of Seduction on her. Appear to be an object of desire. Now, some women are very defensive about seduction. They just like, oh my God, how evil, how awful, all these awful men and everything. Anna's never been like that. She laughs about it. She understands it. She understood that I used one of these tactics on her. We laugh about it now. You know, she can even make fun of me for it. Yeah. Kind of thing. So that helps a lot. I could never be with somebody who moralized about my books and felt like that. So that's another positive thing. There are always limits because creative people, she's a filmmaker, have insecurities. You know, I have insecurities and you have to be aware of that. You know, I grew up having to be kind of careful when I was a child and careful with what I said, careful about my behavior. And so I became very sensitive to people, always having to read them and see what's going on in their mind.
Was that because of your mom or your dad?
Well, I'm not going to get into it because for other reasons I'll explain later. But I had to be very attuned to what other people were thinking to protect myself. So a lot of times things that you think are positive about you, like my ability to be very empathetic and to read inside of people, which is a skill I've been practicing for many decades now, probably stem from something negative, which is how the world works. Right. It's a compensation for a lot of pain in my early childhood. And so I have that in relationships. I can't help it. I originally was going to write the book, The Law of the Sublime, 20 years ago.
Oh.
It's a subject that it fascinated me. I've always been interested in alternative ways of thinking, of people think the world is this way. You mentioned the thing about certainty, which I can't stand. The world could be something completely different than what you imagine it is. There used to be a bumper sticker that said, "Don't believe everything that you think." It's kind of the idea, right? So I was always interested in strange ways of looking at the world and thinking. And that was what the sublime meant to me. And I was intending to write it in 2006. I even hired to research with it. I even did research. My agent was gearing up for it. And then I got derailed by the 50 Cent Project. And in the 50 Cent Project, I had a chapter that was basically about mastery. And that was then evolved into mastery. And mastery had a chapter on social human nature, kind of chapter 4 that we mentioned. It got pushed away. And then I had my stroke. And the sublime, the ultimate in sublime is death and confronting death and what that does to your consciousness. And I literally was, I was this close to dying. And I had a very thin near-death experience, but there were some things like that. And so I go, okay, this is the time to write the book. It's like the gods were sending me a message, right? But I've always had, I'm kind of an earthy person. I'm a Taurus, and I've always been into like things with the senses. Senses are very important to me, sounds and smells and everything. And so, but that doesn't have to be the opposite of spirituality. Spirituality can involve your senses, which is what this book is about. The sublime is a very physical experience, but it's also spiritual at the same time. And that's what makes it so a unique, wonderful experience, because we divide the spiritual from the physical, but there is no division in reality. They're both the same. You're not going to be spiritual unless you have a body, unless you have a brain, unless you have things flowing through, you have blood circulating, So the physical and the sensual and the spiritual are all part of the same package. And when you have a sublime experience, you feel that your body is fully engaged. You're looking up at the stars in the sky. I mean, it's a cliche, but that's the cliched sublime. And you're feeling chills and awe, and your body is responding to the fact that the sky is limitless, that the universe is infinite. And then that triggers a spiritual thought, right? You can't divorce. We are so left brain oriented. We are so in our heads that we don't understand that everything is connected. Everything is a whole. The body and the mind and the spirit, they're all part of one thing. And that's sort of what this book is about. And I've always been that way, always, most definitely. So my drug experiences had a big role in shaping my consciousness, because they made me aware that the world is absolutely insanely beautiful, marvelous, and incredible, but you're asleep, you're not seeing. And in these moments, it only lasts a day. These moments, you're suddenly seeing the world as it actually is, And I can remember just like the feeling of that, looking at like leaves and plants and trees and birds, and just being astounded by the fact that they exist. I mean, I know it sounds cliched, but it's not an intellectual thing. It's in my body. I can return to that feeling sometimes. And when I'm on those bike rides that I mentioned, and the world is appearing interesting to me, I go, wow, that was kind of like that experience back in the Bay Area when I was at Berkeley, doing those drugs. So that played a huge role. And then I read a series of books when I was in high school that probably no one's ever heard of anymore, by Carlos Castaneda, The Teachings of Don Juan. It's very popular in the late 60s and early 70s. Carlos Castaneda was a UCLA anthropology student who went to Mexico, and he found a kind of a curandero, a sort of a spiritual teacher who did a lot of drugs, Don Juan, who was kind of like his coach in a way. These books were fantastic. I love them so much. They mean so much to me. I look at them nowadays and I go, yeah, it's a little bit something for a 16-year-old. They're fantastic. They're wonderful. They had such an impact on me. They even impacted the 48 Laws of Power. If you read Journey to Ixtlan, the second book in the series, there's like 10 of them. you'd see that, well, I see where Robert got the 48 laws of power from. And and I use a quote from that book to open the law of the sublime as a tribute to what that book meant to me. And so those experiences are very much embedded in my mind and who I am. And I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have even written the 48 laws of power without that. They literally expanded my mind and opened me up to looking at the world from different angles. Part of the book comes from my concern that social media is damaging us. I'm being a hypocrite because I still, obviously I use Instagram, etc., but it's damaging us. It's making us so attuned to people, to what other people are doing, to what other people are thinking, that it's bringing out the worst qualities in us, right? It's narrowing our minds, our spirits, everything about us, right? It's narrowing us physically and our senses, because we are animals. We sense things, we smell things. We need to be seeing each other one-on-one. It's not the same on a screen. It's damaging us. It's very dangerous. And this is a book that's trying to get you out of that, and is trying to show you that it's not just the world is wonderful, but it's just that you're locked into a certain way of thinking about the world, a certain way of relating it, and you're not aware of that. You're not aware that you're programmed to look at the world a certain way. So if we look at the world in the 17th century and we look at how people dressed and how they talk, we kind of laugh. My God, that's so silly. All those frills on men's shirts and the way they talk, it was so formal. We're so much better. We don't realize in 300 years, people are going to be laughing the hell out of us at how silly we look, at how our dress, and how we think and how we act. We can't see how we live in conventions and how our minds are programmed culturally and socially. It's a book about getting out of that framework and suddenly seeing what really is going on, and each chapter is a way of getting out of your conventions and your limits and looking at the world. Whoa, animals. Whoa, childhood. Whoa, history. Whoa, love, people. I have a chapter on evolution and how things evolved over millions of years and how they become these technological wonders. A hummingbird is one, but the one I focus on are dragonflies.
Oh yeah.
Dragonflies, dragonflies are one of the oldest species that are still on our planet. They go back 300 million years ago, something like that. And they're probably the first animal or creature that could fly. They're the original flyers, insect or anything, right? And they evolved, they have like 10 wings, and each wing can operate independently of the other, which allows them to go forward, to hover without, and go backward. A hummingbird has that too, to go backwards or to hover, right? Their wings are doing all these incredible things. Scientists, people in the United States Navy were studying them to see how they could create a plane that could do this. Nobody can figure out their technology. They're also the most amazing hunters that have ever existed on the planet, what they can kill with all of their flying skills. And just to think about things that were designed over hundreds of millions of years ago in the perfection of a simple thing like a dragonfly or a hummingbird, it's the whole point of mastery. I try and drum it into your brain that you have a native genius to you in your uniqueness and what is different about you, right? You discovered that yourself. I don't know at what age. I'm not going to pry into that. But at some point you discovered that what makes you different. You left your advertising thing. You have two sides to you too. You have the practical side. You probably had something you enjoyed in the advertising. Then there was something missing and it was more spiritual. And then it was dealing with people and coaching them. You're able to bring all sides of yourself together. There's only one of you, right? And you found it, okay? And once you find it, you don't have to be so afraid, right? You can be a little bit more direct now than you were maybe when you were in New York working for the advertising company. You have your own company. You've earned that right. So when you don't know who you are, when you don't know what makes you unique, when you don't understand what your essence is at your core, you're always looking around at other people. You're always worried about what other people are thinking about you. You're always afraid. You're fearful. You're making decisions based on what other people tell you should be doing, on the career moves you should be making, on the best practices you should be practicing in your business. You're all continually insecure about these things, right? You're never developing yourself. And so you have some deep levels of fear. And when you have that, you're only, as a social animal, what you're going to do is you're going to conform. You're going to be like other people because it's safe, it's easy, it's comfortable, and you can kind of hide yourself in the crowd out. And even if at moments you try to break out and be different, that fear is still there and you go scampering back to your safe corner because, you haven't built that solidness. You don't know who you are. You don't know what makes you unique. And I once was invited to Stanford University by this professor to talk about these things to his group of professors. And they were so negative about me. They're going, well, Robert, that's fine for you, but my grandfather was a truck driver. And how is he ever going to find what's unique about him? Not everybody has to do these things, blah, blah, blah. And my reaction to that is, why should everybody study mastery is, I don't think people are necessarily satisfied deep down being a truck driver. Maybe he was, but there was probably something missing in his life. And maybe being a truck driver could be a form of mastery. If he definitely felt, really close to his truck and he repaired it himself. The guy who fixed the tiles on my patio, he was a master. He had a form of mastery, right? So it's elitist to think that only a select few can discover this. Everybody has unique DNA. When you discover what makes you unique, when you discover that seed inside of you, and you don't need to be so fearful, right? You can express yourself. You know that what makes you weird, what makes you different is your source of power, right? And, there are a lot of people who are successful in life. They make a lot of money who don't have that. They follow that route of being conformist, of doing the best practices, of being, a good business person. But I don't think deep down they're truly, truly satisfied because they're missing something about themselves. There was something in their childhood they never got to express. And there's a level of frustration there.